Hello and welcome to Economy and Markets TV, the show that takes you around the world of economic and financial news. I'm your host, Dave Okenquist, Senior Research Analyst here at Dent. We have a special update today, so I'm bringing on Rodney Johnson. Rodney is, of course, the Senior Editor and Co-Founder of Dent Research. Rodney, welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
We want to give all of you an update to the great trade wars of 2018. We've been touching on this in our Dent Digest, our weekly updates. But, this thing is getting a little bit crazy today, Rodney, isn't it?
It is. I mean, what we had is, of course, the $50 billion that Trump identified at the beginning of all this and said, hey, we have an unequal trade arrangement.
Right.
And he said, but we're going to give you some time before we implement. Well, the implementation happened last Friday. And so really kind of sped things along where the Chinese said, okay, you do that, we're coming back with our own $50 billion. And then, of course, last night, Trump said, well, I'm going to ask our trade rep for a list of an additional $200 billion worth of products to put trade tariffs on at a rate of around 10%. And so that's kind of started this ball rolling clearly downhill.
Now, is this going to be a question of who blinks first? I mean, there is some practicality here, right? I mean, they can't just be throwing out, just make it $1 trillion, make it $5 trillion.
Well, the question is, how much trade do you do, right? And so we buy from the Chinese around $550 billion worth of stuff every year. And so when we say we're going to put tariffs on $50 billion, then another $200 billion, we've got another $270 billion left we can tariff.
Right.
But they sell to us, or they buy from us $150 billion. And so if we put on another 200 for a total of 250, they can't match that because they don't buy $250 billion worth of stuff from us. And by the way, Trump said today, well, if they do that and retaliate with their own 200 billion, I'm going to do another 200 billion, bringing our total to 450 billion. And so it's a practicality, as you say, of how much we buy from each other. But there are always ways to make things difficult. The Chinese can say, we're not going to implement tariffs on more things, but they can still do things like slow roll in the documentation process where they stop more shipments at the ports and say, we have to inspect every single item, which is akin to saying, we're not going to let anything get into the stores. So there's no tariff, there's no quota. It just doesn't make it there. Right. So it could become pretty difficult.
Yes, certainly. I mean, hey, we've got to inspect this cargo here and we've got these regulations. And unfortunately, this shipment doesn't meet our regulations, so we can't accept it, and it's going to just rot, right?
Right, but if you look at the response of the markets, which is easiest to see in the bond markets and the equity markets, our equity markets took a hit. I mean, we're down, 1.5% or so today, meaning 1.5% or so. But the Chinese markets were down 4% last night on this. And so that's a bigger piece of pain. Now, the Dow Jones is negative for the year based on this today, right back under. The Chinese are down 10% for the year, and they're down 18% from their high. And so clearly, this is causing a lot of pain internally. And they're seeing some other issues. Their currency is just getting hammered. Ours is actually a little bit stronger. And our bond yields are going down, meaning we have more demand for our bonds. And so when you look at the overall effects, it is definitely more painful for the Chinese markets than it is for us. But to your point, it's a question of who blinks. We don't want to stop selling airplanes to the Chinese. That would be stupid, right? We don't want to stop buying stuff from them. That would be dumb. We want to come to some arrangement. As you and I have talked about several times, we think that Trump is, or I think that Trump is negotiating. He's not principled, not in a bad way. He's just pragmatic. And so who blinks first? You look at the things he's done in the past where he's always shaking hands and saying we love each other, but we're going to shoot each other on trade.
Right.
I think that they come to something fairly quickly and say, hey, guess what? We both get to save face somehow. I don't know when it happens, but I think that's the goal here.
Now, last look here, the Dow is down 360 points. And I guess, if there's a good time to take some points off the market, but when it's so high, I think we touched on this maybe a couple of weeks ago, it's screaming high. And if it means, it goes down in this way a little bit here and there over some trade spat, that's not really the worst thing in the world, I guess, from a U.S. perspective. From China, it's a little bit different, especially when they're much more reliant on U.S. trade.
Right, and they're reliant on trade around the world as well. And so people are watching this. We're not the only people that the Chinese have an imbalanced trade arrangement with. We're not the only people that they do this technology transfer from. And so clearly other people who are rushing in to say, oh, we want to trade with you. They're also looking at it going, wow, we hope the U.S. actually succeeds because we want to make sure we get a favorable deal as well. And to your point, we're at a very high level in the markets. And so taking some money off the table right here, rather, some frothy bubble points isn't such a bad thing. But we want people to know in the grand scheme of things, tariffs really aren't that big. I mean, the U.S. imposes about an average of 1.61% of tariffs on goods that come in. That's not a high number, but we're actually higher than Canada. We're higher than the EU, just barely. China imposes about 3.6% on average. And so it's not as if there's this 20% tax on everything that goes. We're not talking about huge numbers. It's more about that technology transfer where they require people who do business internally, meaning you put a plant or something there, to allow a local company to have control, and then they take all the technology. Well, that's something to worry about, certainly. But I think we'll come to an arrangement. It's not something where I think it's going to drop the market by 20 or 30%. This is just a knee-jerk reaction where everybody's trying to figure out where the players are going to be standing when the dust settles.
Right. And hopefully we'll just sort of settle on a negotiation that everyone can claim a victory, and then we could get back to a little bit more of normalcy, right? And then
Exactly. But when you read the financial press or you see all these things on television, it's like the world is ending because of this.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. The world hasn't ended when any of the other things happened. I don't think it's going to end on this. Because as I said, this isn't principled. I think we're actually going to come to some negotiated settlement.
Yeah, the world, I think, ended like 20 times this month. So
exactly.
Yeah. All right, Rodney, I appreciate you coming on in this short notice to give everybody an update. This is really some great perspective here in case anybody's worried about this sort of thing. So we think it's going to be okay.
Exactly.
So, yeah, well, thank you again. I want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all again soon.